Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith and right next to me is no one. Well, the teacup is doing tea things. Don't ask me about them because I'm not a tea drinker. I have no idea what this includes, but it is necessary preparing for a Zoom call of her own doing tea things again tomorrow. But I'm not completely alone because joining me again is returning guest Laury A. Egan. Laury, hello and welcome back on the show.
Hello there, Edith. It's a pleasure to come back, as always.
It's a pleasure to have you on again. And you promised us to read an extract from your book, Once Upon an Island. So the stage is all yours.
All right. Well, this is a really interesting book because it's set in 1966 on St. Croix. And I happen to have been there at that time. So there are some autobiographical details, which is unusual for me. So I'm going to do a little reading and then we can talk more about the plot. There's a 16-year-old girl, Olivia, who travels to the island with her mother, a very glamorous artist. And Olivia is dealing with a lot of issues. So here's a passage from day 2 of Once Upon an Island. Olivia is exiting the hotel pool and notices a woman in her late 40s sitting on a chaise reading a newspaper. Quote, her hair was gathered with a pink kerchief, though some silver and black curls escaped and fell on either side of her forehead. The woman's slender arms and legs were graceful, yet her torso was thick, a figure others might describe as matronly. I didn't think of her in those terms because she exuded an exotic sensuality. As I climbed out of the pool, the woman looked up. She wore dark sunglasses, so her eyes weren't visible, but something told me they would be mesmerizing. Although I usually avoid beginning conversations, I said, hello. Good afternoon. You must be our newest resident. I smiled. Yes, my mother and I are here for 4 weeks. She's an artist. This amused the woman. Her chuckle was rich and creamy. How lovely. She removed her sunglasses to reveal luminous grayish-blue eyes. Her gaze was direct, but uncritical, appraising yet strangely empathetic. And what is your name? She asked. Oh, sorry, I said, aware that I had been staring at her. Olivia Livingston. Olivia suits you. She placed the newspaper on the table. I'm Sophia Florian. Nice to meet you. I offered my hand. Her grasp was gentle but not tentative. Have you been at the Pink Fancy long? About a month. I'm staying up there. She pointed above the pool and laughed. My apartment is called Little Joy, which I suspect is not meant to be ironic, but for me it's quite apt. I plan to live here until I find a job. So you're not a visitor? I am a visitor everywhere. This was a sentiment I understood. Suddenly it occurred to me that Sophia was the person I was supposed to meet at this time, in this place. She continued, I was born in a village near Prague. I nodded. But Florian is not. Yes, actually it is a Czech name. However, my husband was German. She said the last word with reluctance. You are an American, yes? I nodded again. From New Jersey on the coast. Ah, so you must love the water. I can see that you swim like a dolphin. Perhaps you possess a fluid spirit. Was Sophia some kind of gypsy? I didn't know how to respond because I'd never experienced such a startling exchange. Without asking permission to join her, I pulled over a chair and sat. I like being invisible, I admitted. Although it sounds ridiculous, swimming in the ocean or even a pool allows me to disappear. Not ridiculous at all, Sophia held my glance. I understand completely. You're wise to wish to disappear. The world is often harsh. It targets the sensitive people. She was speaking about me, but I suspected she was also referring to herself, employing an uncommon familiarity after such a brief conversation. Although I was usually shy, I asked why she had come to St. Croix. Sophia smiled. I came without planning to do so. When my ship arrived in port, I felt drawn to the island. I had never been here before, yet I respect instincts when they're strong. Thus, Olivia, I have washed upon these shores a displaced person. In a quieter voice, Sophia added, maybe I have been one since I was young. She observed me with care. Perhaps you are a displaced person too. I studied her wide-set eyes, broad cheekbones, strong chin, and full lips. She wasn't a standard beauty like my mother, but there was a churning intensity underneath the surface calm. You're right, I do feel displaced, I replied. I don't feel like I belong anywhere to anyone. I hesitated. Well, maybe I did once, a long time ago. Leaning forward, Sophia listened intently. I believe we understand each other, Olivia, but we will talk more soon. Would you like that? Yes, Mrs. Florian. Ah, please, Sophia is better. I am no longer a Mrs. Florian. She didn't elaborate on this remark, which whetted my curiosity. Sophia wore no wedding band. Was she widowed, divorced? Did she have children? Sophia considered. This may be forward, but if you're free for lunch tomorrow, would you and your mother like to come for goulash? She replaced her sunglasses, dropping a veil between us. I didn't want to share my new friend, but I had no excuse not to include my mother. I'll ask. Mother is working on a portfolio, so I'm not sure she's free. I'd like to come even if she can't, if that's okay. Yes, of course. Now I must go and cook dinner. She tucked the newspaper under her arm and rose. Gently, she touched my shoulder, smiled, and climbed the path to her apartment. I stood and felt as if I'd witnessed a brilliant comet shooting across the sky, arriving from a far distant galaxy. I wanted to learn about Sophia's life, and unusual in my experience, I wanted to share mine. There you go.
Splendid. Thank you for reading for us. I have to say, after reading your book, there is a lot of beauty in your book, and there is a lot of tragedy as well.
Yes, as it turns out, Sophia was a World War II prisoner who was in Ravensbrück concentration camp.
Yeah.
So she's got that going on. And then Olivia, the main character, her brother died, and she feels that her mother and father blame her for the accident, and she blames herself. So she's got this sort of also this issue she's dealing with, and then she begins to see her dead brother in Christiansted on St. Croix, and becomes fixated on that. Plus, she's at war with her mother in the typical 16-year-old fashion. So there are a lot of things going on in this book.
And not just the two of them, or not just Olivia and Sophia. We also learn a little bit about the hotel owner, Travis. He also has a tragic past. You left no one out here.
Well, he there's a mystery around Travis, why he came to St. Croix from the U.S. and what his background was, but we sort of figure out that something is amiss with his family. I'm not going to reveal anything here, but he's an absolutely charming character, and I based it on the owner of the Pink Fancy Hotel that I got to know, who was one of the most wonderfully charming men I've ever met.
Yeah, he seems also very charming. He's not the baddie. I mean, he's a charming man, like you said. He's not the baddie. We learn about him, not giving too much away. I mean, for our listeners, where did Sophia come from? Her tragic character.
She is a Czechoslovakian, a widow, and she's probably in her late 40s, I believe. This is taking place in 1966. So she had, because of her nationality and because her family's really horrible history with the Nazis, she went through a huge amount through World War II, and basically lost everybody. And I won't say much more than that, but she's had a very, very tragic, difficult past, and she's sort of washed up on St. Croix. She has no place else to go, really.
And I mean, I've read the book till the end, of course. Also, your notes on the characters. So, can you elaborate a little bit on the real life person that inspired her character?
Well, the woman's name was Elena Eisenhower, and she looked a little like the French actress Simone Signoret not in her early days, but what she would have looked like in her late 40s. She was an absolutely magnetic person, and we just hit it off right away. So that there was really quite a bit of accuracy in terms of that character. And all I knew about Elena was that she had worked side by side with her other Czechs trying to sabotage the Nazi invasion. I think she brought things at night into the fields, food and things like that. But I always believed there was more to her story than she revealed to me. And so I just sort of extrapolated from that feeling and created this character that is partly based on her, but the whole Ravensbrück thing is all completely fiction.
And you said at the beginning it's a teeny tiny bit autobiographic. Just a tiny bit. So Olivia, her character. I mean, she's not you. But would you say that a little bit of you is at least also in her?
Yeah, I confess. I don't usually write autobiographical characters because I have so much fun inventing people, and I enjoy that whole process, and that's part of the reason I like to write. But in this case, very interestingly enough, when I was 16 and on St. Croix with my mother, who is an artist, and was working on a portfolio of work for the A.H. Reese Gallery on St. Thomas, I was just beginning to, really think I'm going to be a writer when I grow up. And I said to myself, well, wouldn't it be interesting to write a novel about being on an island and why people choose to come on an island and stay there and live? Now, I had just finished Lord of the Flies, which is not necessarily anything like this book at all. But I guess that also was in the back of my mind. So I made a little promise to myself that one day I would write a novel about being on an island. So it took me 50 years, but I did it.
You did it, exactly. So what is it about islands then that you, at the beginning of your book, you allude to the fact that people want to escape to islands. You just said so yourself. But at the same time, trying to escape doesn't really work when you have to confront yourself.
That's true. I think that there is something really fascinating about the sort of being on a place where nobody knows who you are, where you could start over again. The Travis character, for example, in the book makes that point. But the downside is you're still bringing your personal history, your personality, your background with you. So how does that play out in a sort of compressed atmosphere like an island? In a way, being on an island is a little like Agatha Christie's cozies in the sense of that you have a limited environment and sort of people bounce off that the walls of that. And I think that compression has always fascinated me, and it's true. I have other books that are have a similar kind of issue with the compression of a location.
Would you agree that the distractions are less intense on an island? Because when there is not so much input from outside sources as it is on an island, you ultimately are forced to reflect on your present, reflect on your past.
Well, I think the Olivia character does do that. And I think to an extent, the Sophia character does that as well. Travis is avoiding it.
Yep.
And the mother, Olivia's mother, also is more like Travis in the sense that they want to have a good time. They want to drink. They want to party. They want to, enjoy themselves, and they want to forget. And they don't want to deal with or communicate anything. So one of Olivia's problems here was dealing with a mother who wouldn't discuss this very painful death of Olivia's brother and the fact that the mother sort of blamed Olivia for the accident. So I think that there are different kinds of people, and the people that really are reflective and self-aware or trying to be self-aware will use the experience of being on an island to do that kind of soul searching. But those people who went to an island to avoid dealing with anything, they will continue to sort of do things that will be really active, drink too much, all of those things. And I think so, the book reflects both of those experiences.
Yeah. In Olivia's case, I got the impression, or the way you described her and what was going to happen also at the end of the book, it was for her a positive experience, being on the island, being reflective. It helped her deal with the past and get a sort of conclusion. Sophia, on the other hand, seems to be haunted. She still can't escape what happened in her past.
Well, she's had nobody really to help her do that. In a small way, Olivia does, but not enough, because the damage and the pain is just so overwhelming and deep. Whereas Olivia is much younger, and actually Sophia is a very cathartic character for Olivia to meet. And one of the descriptors I use is this book is really a resurrection in many ways, and that is, in the case of Olivia, not necessarily Sophia. So I think Olivia, there's one point, I don't remember the wording, but Olivia has a lot of future left ahead of her. She's got her whole life in front that, is different than Sophia, who is mostly looking backward and has much, doesn't have that, happy, rosy future potential there. So they're angled differently in their lives because of the age differences and also their environments in their families.
They are both looking backwards. They are both people who do not necessarily live in the present. I think Sophia states that as well. They do tend to look backwards, but would you say that for Olivia, what she has going for herself, more or less, is the resilience of youth?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, she's in a difficult situation. She's not getting along with her parents. They're not getting along with each other. And she's an only child, as I am too. So that was another little detail. But I think that she recognizes that she's got creative ability. She's interested in photography, for example, and thinks she might want to be a journalist, either as a writer or a photographer. So she's already got some ideas about what she might contribute to the world at some point. Whereas that's not the case for Sophia. She's unable to really, create anything that would make her feel better about, what she's giving to the world. She's sort of stuck, really. Yeah.
And Olivia's mother, she takes also a major role in the book. The elusive one is her father. We get a little glimpse of her father, but not enough to learn more about his character.
I think he's been very self-involved. He's a pilot, and he flies to Europe, so he's gone a lot. And at first, Olivia thinks that he is the better parent, partly because he's not around as much. And so, she's got this sort of more positive feeling towards her father, but this is not necessarily an accurate view of him. I mean, he's not a good guy, really. And he's pretty selfish. And he's having fun going all over the world and, probably having affairs, when he travels to various countries as a pilot.
I just remembered something one of my former colleagues once said about friends of hers, and it just came to mind when you spoke about Olivia's parents. Sorry, do you think that some relationships or some people in a relationship feel as if they are enough for each other, and children are some sort of intruders? They are always on the outside. They are never part of this relationship. Do you think that's true? Do you think that's true in this case?
Yeah, I think so. Olivia believes that her brother was more loved, particularly by her mother.
Yeah.
And so his loss and the fact that the mother blames her doesn't particularly, bring them any closer together, needless to say. I think both of these two characters, both of her parents, are selfish, very self-involved, and they're avoiders. They don't want to communicate anything. They're not particularly warm parents. They're very reserved. Partly this was also the case at the time. A lot of American families were like this. My own family, are not the huggy, kissy types at all. I mean, even though the father in this book has absolutely no resemblance to my own father, the mother has some resemblance to mine, who would probably scalp me alive for this book if she was alive to read it. Though she was much better, nicer than Evelyn in this book. I think that these are very selfish parents, and they're very involved with their lives.
Yep, but are they involved? I mean, they are. You call them selfish, but is that really the same as when we call people too close to each other? Let's call them too close to each other in a relationship. A couple, for example, who feel as if when you look at them, maybe it's not the case, but when you look at them, they are completely enough for each other. And children, they do have children sometimes, and yet you get the feeling, like I said, as if the children are never part of this relationship at all.
Well, I agree. I think that model often happens. In this particular case, I don't think the two parents are very close any longer. And I don't really go into the beginning of their relationship because it was before Olivia was born. Yeah. So in this sense, I have the feeling that the three players here are really separate from each other, all three ways. This is a triangle that is sort of pulled apart. So I don't think that the parents necessarily are closer to each other than they are to Olivia.
I mean, it also happens, doesn't it, that we can be in a family, in a relationship, and yet you can be very alone.
Yes. Yes, I think that there's a lot of alone feeling that Olivia is experiencing. And my belief is that a lot of times a creative person uses that aloneness as a impetus to create. And, that was true for my case, because that is a similar kind of situation I was in when I was a child. I began writing because I was by myself. I had no brothers or sisters or family. I had no neighbors really close by. So I began writing. And I think that the character of Olivia shares some of those, reasons for her own photography and writing.
Maybe people who are so involved with themselves or their art, like you said, is it better maybe if they don't have children?
Pardon?
Is it better if when people are so involved with themselves and with their art and what they do, that they shouldn't necessarily have children at all?
I agree with you.
I mean,
I think so. In my own personal case, my mother thought she couldn't get pregnant and was ready to, was not interested in marrying my father. And because he talked her into it, that began their marriage, but it wasn't an easy or a happy one. And they just didn't fit well together, really. And so I was either dealing with one parent or I was dealing with the other parent. And we really didn't have that kind of family sense. So I agree with you that there are cases where some people just are not good parent material. I am one of them, I'm sure. I would have probably produced a real horror.
I mean, back then, at your parents, when they were young, it was probably harder not to get married. I mean, these days, isn't it easier to live a life of self-indulgence and artfulness and whatnot?
Perhaps. I still think there's a lot of societal pressure to sort of conform a little bit, even though it's not as great as it was once. And I think we've all been a little bit brainwashed into thinking, that we have to tie in to one person and make a commitment. And a lot of times that's fine, and it's appropriate. But for some people, it's difficult, particularly someone who puts their creative abilities first, or their scientific interests, whatever it might be, first. I think it's very difficult for these people to, form relationships that don't impinge on their main feeling about who they are and what they're supposed to do in this life.
Do you think it was, or maybe it still is, easier for men to live such a life even though they are married, because the wives are supposed to run their lives at home and make everything go smoothly?
Absolutely. I still think that's the case. I still think there is definitely men are given a lot more freedom. There are a lot of assumptions that men, that in this case, the father who is a pilot can travel, and that's not an issue, even though he's rarely home. And when he is, he's out socializing or playing golf or whatever he's doing. So he's not really giving quality time to either his wife or his daughter. So yes, I believe that that's still somewhat the case, although, hopefully things are changing a bit, and these sort of role models that were in the past are disappearing.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. You've written the book completely in the first person. Your first person narrator is Olivia. Was it your intention from the beginning to put us on her shoulder? Yeah.
Because it did have some autobiographical details. It was pretty hard to avoid it. Not that I am 100% Olivia by any means, but it just felt more comfortable. I don't always do this. This is my 10th book, and I've done third person
Mm-hmm.
a number of times
Mm-hmm.
as well. And I write a lot of stories too, so I vary between the two. It just
Mm-hmm.
depends on the book, and sometimes I'll split the narration. So I may have one character
Mm-hmm.
using their narration and then another one there.
Mm-hmm.
So the book may be divided.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I'm just finishing up a project about a boy with dissociative identity disorder, and
Mm-hmm.
the book is told from both the host and the alter personality, who are very
Mm.
different. So I had fun with that.
Have you have
So
you have you heard? Sorry to interrupt you, but have you heard of the book? I think it's Five Minds by Guy Maupass.
no, I
No,
haven't.
it's a crime fiction. It's a psychological thriller, and five people, more or less, live in the same body, and one of them, one person, is trying to kill them.
Well, that's sort of, you know, the alter personality in this case is sort of sociopathic, so it's a little similar.
Mm-hmm.
And I write his viewpoint in third person, and the
Mm-hmm.
main narrative is the host, which is I, first person.
Okay. Okay. Did you get
So
confused?
a little bit. But the one had such a strong voice, the bad
Okay.
guy
Yeah. Yeah.
really had a
Yeah.
strong voice. Was much more flip, narcissistic, so, everything he thought about and wrote down was just from that personality. So it was actually pretty easy to keep them apart after
Okay.
I fell into their
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
characters. I understood who they were.
Okay. And who was more fun to write then?
Oh, the bad guy, of course.
It's always the bad guys, isn't it? I mean,
I always think of Patricia Highsmith, who must have been a real hellion. I know she was a heavy drinker from all reports, not a pleasant personality. But all of her sociopaths that she writes about, I can certainly identify with her fascination. I think it's
hmm,
a great outlet for, any of
hmm.
our, very quiet little impulses that we all have. She might
Indeed.
have had very large impulses, though.
From what I've heard about her, you might be right. You might be right. I mean, we love to read about those kind of people, but do we really want to meet them?
Probably not,
Not.
but I think if you can create a character that feels um, understandable in some fashion, even if you
Mm-hmm.
can't be empathetic with that character, if you can sort of feel like, yeah, I get that. In other words, just creating an
Mm,
all black character, bad guy black kind of character, that's cheap. That doesn't
mm,
do anything. You need to have somebody who has got something that humanizes him
mm.
or her.
You mean some redeeming trait,
Yeah.
at least. But do you think that, oh, would you agree that there are some people out there who do not have a single redeeming trait in them?
Probably. Yeah, your really true psychopath really doesn't.
Mm,
Although, you look at somebody like a Hannibal Lecter character who was probably the epitome of
mm,
one of the most frightening
yeah.
characters ever written about or filmed. Even so, maybe it was Anthony Hopkins' portrayal, I don't know, but there's still something you can grab onto
Mm-hmm.
about that character,
Mm,
even though he's just awful. There's still something so mesmerizing and fascinating
yeah.
about him. And I think the reader can sort of get why he's doing what he's doing.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Indeed. True. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, I loved your book. It was a fascinating read, and I also liked your characters. Where would you put your book on a shelf? Because I'm asking that because publishers usually like labels, So,
Well, Once Upon an Island, I would say, is more literary,
mm,
but it's also sort of what we would call upmarket fiction.
mm,
Because it's a good read, and it's it's not highbrow or anything like that. I mean, there's a fair amount of really lush feeling in the book in terms of the island itself, the people, the characters. And there's a lot of, quite a bit of history, which I had to research in there.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it was a complicated book to write. And it's at this point, it's still my favorite of the books that I've published. I'm probably very proud of this, possibly because I promised myself 50 years ago to do it. And I usually am not a procrastinator, but
well, at least
so I would say a little more on the literary side, but not in an off-putting way that would intimidate anybody.
I mean, the tidbits of research you put in there, how hard was to decide what to put in and what to leave out from your research? Because this is always very hard for people also who write historic fiction.
I really admire anybody who writes historic fiction. And I've never, to me, 1966 is still within, my lifetime and my memory. But for many people, that would be historic fiction because of their age. I did have to do a lot of research, particularly on the German and Czechoslovakian stories in there, and the details about Ravensbrück concentration camp, of which I was unfamiliar. So, and I'm not a professional historian, but I did try to be accurate as much as I could be.
Yeah, indeed. And you've mentioned, are we allowed to mention that you have a new publisher?
I am thrilled. I am thrilled. I have a new best friend, Andrew May at Spectrum Books in London. He and his father, Carl, who has been in publishing for many years, they accepted a new book for August 12th appearance, The Firefly.
Which is very good, dear listeners. Book. Yes, it's very good, dear listeners. I got the permission to read it. I liked it. I liked it a lot.
Thank you. It's, it's a romance and a coming of age story. So in that sense,
and I couldn't put it down because and I couldn't put it down. And then, do they meet again? What is going to happen? Will she make it happen? Or will she leave us hanging? No, you will have to see for yourself, dear listeners.
Yeah, and then I have a new psychological suspense called The Psychologist's Shadow, about a stalker, a psychologist who acquires a stalker. And at first she doesn't know what's happening, and then she starts getting hang-up calls and strange little gifts on the steps to her office, and then at home where she's living alone at her parents' house while they're traveling. So this is really interesting because as a therapist, she's thinking, well, it might be one of my clients, but I'm not sure. So the book is structured so that you sit in on the various sessions that she holds, and then her various conjectures about, well, that's odd, or maybe this person is my stalker. So it's all about that. And then the third project Andrew at Spectrum is doing is very unusual for me, and one I'm very proud of, is two partially linked novellas called The Black Leopard's Kiss and The Writer Remembers. And it is a magical realism, and it has sort of a Virginia Woolf, Orlando-esque feeling to it.
Okay.
I am really excited about that one.
Well, looks interesting. And your psychological stalker thriller, is it set in the present?
I'm trying to think. I think it's in 1992.
Oh, okay. Why this?
I try to get rid of all the cell phones and because that drives me crazy because everybody knows where everybody is.
A bit of cheating. Yeah, now that you mentioned it, because you probably have seen that the Teacup and I have been to Crime Fest, and cell phones seem to be really a pain in the backside because, like you just said, everybody knows where everyone is all the time, and it makes it harder.
It is, and the fact that somebody could track your presence if your phone's on, or and the onus is so much on communication with anybody, constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And so anybody who's having a serious
Yeah.
problem, like having
Yeah.
a stalker,
Yeah.
would probably communicate to some acquaintances.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Whereas might not, if that connection isn't so strong.
True. That's
And at
true.
one point she says, well, when the phone rings, and it's the stalker, but only breathing is heard, she says, well, at least he or she is not on the property, because he couldn't call me if he was on the property.
Yeah.
So that's just like one example of why cell phones are a nuisance, because that wouldn't be the case.
True, but islands are also a very good place, because you should read The Birthday Girl by Sarah Ward, who was our guest on the show, and I absolutely loved her book, her new series. And again, getting rid of the cell phone problem in a storm on an island in the Atlantic off the coast of Wales. I mean, between Ireland and Wales, it helps. Let's put it that way. And it's also a sort of closed room mystery just on an island in a hotel. Again, a hotel. Fascinating read, because at the beginning of the book we have it begins with the perspective of the killer. We are introduced to our perpetrator right at the beginning of the book. She makes an appearance.
That's sort of what I did with my book. Yeah. I have a little journal section, so after each chapter, which is written by the stalker.
Yeah.
It's just a little, like, a paragraph or two or three paragraphs. So you get into the mind of, but not the identity of the person who is an erotomaniac, which is the term. Which is not necessarily erotic. It's just somebody who is fixated. It's a mania. This is described, a clinical description. So I do sort of tell the story from that perspective as well, even though they're very short bites.
Yeah. It's interesting to get in the mind, yet you do not know whose mind we are in while reading. Yeah. It's the same with Sarah's book. You will probably enjoy her book. Just saying. Yeah, I mean, have you ever thought, since you mentioned Agatha Christie, cozy? Is it something you would dip your toe into, writing cozy?
Well, I have done that in a sense. The book Double Crossed takes place mostly within a house.
But it's not cozy.
It wasn't cozy, but the setting of the house is very significant, and then there's a later scene on a sailboat, but again, extremely contained.
Yeah.
And then another book, Wave in D minor, is set in a house on the Maine coast up in during a blizzard, during the winter. So she, again, there is a certain amount of compression there. So most of the action takes place in the house.
So would you say, for you as a writer, place is very important?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Once Upon an Island, if that setting, I fell in love with this island back when I was 16. I came back the following year. So I was there for 2 years and 2 months total. I had been there when I was really young, just part of a cruise, but that really was an inspiring part. In fact, I have heard a lot of people from St. Croix who were either have, moved back to the mainland since, but keep in contact. I've vetted, they've vetted books, and they were just so pleased to read about the descriptions that they remembered so well, including, like, one point I mentioned in the book, Charlie, I think it was an English Spaniel, who was at the sort of the host at one of the restaurants, and it turned out Charlie's owner, who was a boy then, got in contact with me, and he said, "Yeah, I love that dog." So it was just amazing. This guy later went on to be a magistrate and a judge on the island, and he lives now in the U.S. But I had so much fun reconnecting, with people that were there at that time. and have wonderful memories. So yeah, place is very important in this book.
Place before character in this book?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say the opposite either. I'm going to waffle on that one.
Okay. But I mean, to build the sense of the place is important, especially when you write, like you said, psychological thrillers. It's important to get the reader to feel the oppressiveness, maybe, or the beauty in this case, to get into the book.
Yeah, sometimes beauty is interesting because it can produce the opposite effect in contrast.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that, setting a place that the reader can drop into and feel secure. I am in this place and I feel it. That will also allow really subtle changes so that there's an ominous quality that can move in with the weather or darkness or shadows at night. These things really help a writer color the mood and the feelings that the main characters are going through.
Beauty can be treacherous, can't it? I mean, on your island, you mentioned it a few times in the book, storms that roll in. And we've had that also, books that are set in the mountains, for example. At one moment, it's absolutely beautiful. In the next moment, it becomes life-threatening.
Yeah, the contrast is interesting. I always thought, for example, Virginia Woolf, who killed herself on a beautiful sunny day, a spring day, where probably all the colors were out, and she was very sensitive and appreciative of growth and flowers and all of that. I often thought that maybe it was the beauty of the spring day that sort of pushed her over the edge. In a funny way, sometimes these contrasts can have that effect. So it sort of magnifies her sense of being alone or, depression.
You mean you can't share this moment with anyone? Maybe, yeah. True. Absolutely true. Yeah. So, Laurie, we've heard about your plans. We heard what's going to happen next. We're looking forward to it. Like I said, dear listeners, I had the pleasure of reading the next book in line, which is coming in August.
August 12th. Yeah. It's called The Firefly.
Wonderful read. Grab it, I have to tell you. Grab it. I'm absolutely looking forward to the psychological stalker thriller without cell phones. I will put mine away as well while reading it. Laurie, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Well, I think, I'm very pleased with Once Upon an Island. I really feel like this hit the spot for me. I mean, it just feels like one of those books where I did exactly what I wanted to do, which I can't always say perfectly I've done. I think people are going to really feel the depth of this book. I think there's a lot of really interesting, a lot of interesting scenes that and really strong dialogue between particularly the Sophia character and the Olivia character. So I think that, this is a book that should appeal to a pretty wide range of people.
I would agree. There's an underlying tension between your characters, not in the bad way, in the good way, actually. And it's sad. The ending is a tiny, teeny bit sad. Not giving anything away, but I was hoping. But yeah, life isn't like that, is it?
No. And sometimes this sort of happy ever after ending just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's not realistic. And
absolutely.
I never, when I'm writing, I never sit down and think, oh, I'm going to have a happy ending here. I don't think that way. I let the situation unfold organically and see where the characters and the plot takes me. Because, otherwise I think I would be forcing everything down a funnel that I had created, and it would feel arbitrary. So, this is a nostalgic book, very much so.
Yeah, a good book. Do you think life should come with a trigger warning?
No, I don't. You just have to put up with it, deal with it.
Well, if you ask some people, maybe it should. Who knows? I don't know. No, it shouldn't. Ignore me. The listeners ignore me. Just. Laury, it was wonderful to have you on the show. It was wonderful talking to you. We are very much looking forward to more books. And now that you have a new publisher, they seem to be coming.
Well, these books have been in process for quite a while. The Psychologist's Shadow was, I think, started in 2013. So, I've been doing major reworks on them and revisions. And so there may be a cluster, which I just couldn't help, but I'm so happy to have a wonderful new publisher.
Yeah, and you were enjoying every minute of it, I suppose.
I am.
Good for you. Congratulations on that. Thank you for joining us. Joining me.
Thank you so much, Edith. Okay, take care.
You did enjoy this episode as much as we did? Then hit subscribe and don't miss the next episode. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. If you like to support us and buy us a coffee, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee and other platforms. You can find all the necessary links in the description. Until next time.